Jasmine, welcome to Dear Diaspora. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Let's get started by getting to know you just a bit more. Tell us a bit about where you're from and where you grew up.
Yeah, so I am originally from Trenton, New Jersey. I've spent most of my life there, but I've lived in like many cities in the States.
And what would you say shaped your understanding of the African continent growing up? Like, did you have experiences with, different African cultures? Did you learn about it in school?
So definitely did not learn about it in school, which is the case for many people growing up in the States. But Trenton has a huge Liberian population. So I went to high school with a number of African students who were from that community as well. And my first long-term boyfriend was Liberian. So that's basically like how I really got introduced to African culture, mostly like food and attire and songs through weddings and stuff like that. Liberian culture was my first kind of engagement with the continent.
And are you open to sharing a bit more about what dating a Liberian was like? Or maybe
Um,
his family, especially, like, were they pretty open, would you say?
that's a good question. I wasn't expecting that. I think he was born in Liberia, but was like fully raised in the States. So he was pretty like Americanized, I guess first gen African like experience. But I spent a lot of time with his mother before even dating him, which I feel like is the key, right? Because I had an after school job working at TJ Maxx for a lot of high school. And his mom worked there, do like day shifts, but we would always like pass each other. So I got to know her very well, her first. And it was like a bunch of young high schoolers like working at TJ Maxx part-time. And I will say she was very much like, they don't have any respect. But I feel like she would say to me like, but Jasmine, Jasmine is a sweet girl. Like Jasmine is a nice girl. So I feel like the fact that his mother like really loved me made it easy for us to date. But of course that meant like you're dating the entire family. And so when you break up and you try to break up with the whole family, they don't really understand. We were together for 6 years and we break up, and this is like some time ago. I think maybe like last year, after living in SA for such a long time, I went back to the States and I went to see his mom. And she was just like, why haven't I heard from you in all this time? And I was trying to explain to her like, yeah, but when you're trying to move past the relationship or get over someone, you have to like cut ties with everyone. Don't you understand that? And she straight up was like, no.
Yeah, I didn't know that about you, so
Yeah.
thanks for being open to answering that. You go from, a bit of exposure to Liberian
Yeah.
culture, around like high school time. Did that shift for you once you got to college, or was it kind of a similar dynamic?
After Spelman is when I got more interested, started thinking a little bit more about what do I want to do with my life, which is when like thinking about Africa kind of came back into the picture.
So, what would you say inspired your decision to move to the continent?
I wish I could say that it was like super intentional. I really wish I was that girl. I've been thinking about, going back to the motherland for as long as I can remember. No, it was not like that. I'm a first generation college student, first in my family to go to college, first in my family to like get a professional degree. So I kind of have been winging career path and life. What I was very specific on was like, I do want to go abroad. I had been working at a bank for like nearly 5 years. I knew I was supposed to apply to business school. I was just thinking to myself, like, I do want an international experience, but I don't want to go to Europe. I don't want to go to South America. I don't want to go to Asia. I was very, like, I really simply wanted to experience life amongst people who look like me a little bit. And for me, it just kind of felt like it made sense. I'm a Black American, you know, I have some ancestry, and it turned out to be, of course, much more than I had imagined.
So obviously we know each other through the Princeton and Africa
Yes.
Fellowship.
Yes.
And you ended up doing your fellowship in
Kampala, Uganda. It was from 2015 to 2016. And I was working for this infrastructure development organization called Electra Limited. And I was the finance associate. And I don't know if, you know, you'll talk to a lot of fellows from like Princeton in Africa or Peace Corps or like any fellows where you like have to go and work in an office with another culture. I don't know if they would say that like working in the office with that other culture is the best part of their experience, but that was hands down the best part of living in Uganda. Because when you're working with local people, it's like, nah, I'm interacting with you every day. So I'm seeing what your life is like. I'm seeing how you live, seeing how you move in the world, things that are important to you. So it really gave me a chance to like live among people who look like me, but have very completely different experiences than me. I remember like in the beginning, I'm like at work and I'm being American. I'm eating my lunch at my desk, working through the lunch hour. And everyone would leave for lunch. I'm thinking people are going out to eat lunch. Meanwhile, they're in the back at the table having lunch together every day. So one time, one of them walks up to me and is like, "What's wrong with you?" Straight up, "What's wrong with you?" I'm like, "Oh, no, nothing, blah, blah." He's like, "You don't eat lunch?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I ate at my desk." He's like, "Nah, we eat lunch in the room." I'm like, oh, "Okay, thank you." Yeah.
That's beautiful. And I feel like that, you know, makes your experience just that much more authentic.
Definitely.
So it's awesome that you got to experience that. What would you say surprised you about living in Africa?
Okay, so there are a number of things, but I think one thing that has really surprised me about living on the continent is just how different people think of identity, you know, and how your idea or understanding of identity evolved over time. When I was in Uganda, a Ugandan would point at me on the street and be like, "Mzungu," which is a Swahili word for white person, right, or foreigner. And of course, I mean, for me, a Black American woman, someone calling me a white woman, the historical context, I mean, it was just really hard for me to truly understand like quickly. It took some time, which when speaking to my like Ugandan coworkers, I would ask them like, "Yo, you know, why did this lady call me a white woman?" And they would be like, "I mean, Jasmine, you're a foreigner, so sometimes people kind of use that word interchangeably, but you do look different from us. You do sound different from us." And at the time, I had my hair like pretty curly, and I had like dyed it blonde. So in between braids, I would like have like little wet and goes, which would be very short because I have pretty short hair, and coarse hair. But he would even be like, "And your hair, like, look at your hair. Like, our hair don't do that." But to me, I'm like, wow, that's crazy. Or even thinking about like living in South Africa, right? And having to really adjust to the Black versus white versus colored categories of race in this country. And just, you know, thinking that I'm speaking to someone who might be, you know, a light-skinned South African, and then somebody's like, "Nah, that's a colored person," you know. For me, I feel like my idea of identity has just really evolved. And I guess what I've come away with is like, identity is really about how you feel and how you see yourself, in addition to how the world interacts with you most of the time, right? So I can't say that I'm super crystal clear on it, but it's evolving.
Beautiful. I mean, sounds like you're on quite the journey.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to hear even more about, you know, just what you continue to learn about yourself.
Yeah.
You know, the more time that you spend on the continent. And, you know, what you shared reminded me of like a few like interactions I had, like working in Ghana also, and how there would be, you know, I wanted to kind of maintain my same routines and like, on my way to the office, I would stop at a coffee shop, get me a latte, very bougie. And, when I would get to work, my coworkers would kind of tease me and they'd be like, oh, obroni, which means like white person in tree. A language spoken in Ghana.
Yeah.
And I'd always be like, what? Like, no.
Because I'm having coffee?
Obroni, but just forgetting like a latte before work.
Yeah.
But then it's like in that moment, they were speaking more to, obviously, like I'm a Black person, I'm an African person, but they were speaking more to my Americanness or my foreignness. Yeah. And so them using the word obroni, they weren't calling me white. They were just saying, girl, you're so American, you're so foreign.
Yes.
So it's interesting, like navigating that in like office spaces, especially because then you really get a sense of like what people actually like think of you, the impression that you're leaving on people.
Yeah, they thought America was crazy. Like they would specifically say, your problem is y'all are too free, Jasmine. You're too free. Imagine someone telling you that America's too free. And I'm like, what? You guys are nuts. But in their mind, it was very true because the sentiment of America's freedom came up because it was around the time when Kim Kardashian was posed somewhere naked. And I mean, they were like, she should be in jail. And I was very much like, they were like, she would be in jail if she lived here. And I was like, okay, guys, like that seems a little extreme, maybe you might feel it's inappropriate, but they were very much like, she should be in jail. And I'm like standing up at the table like, no, women have rights. Women should be able to da-da-da. And that man turned to me and said, Jasmine, do not come over here with your Western views. He said, don't bring your Western views over here to Uganda. And the entire table just like burst into laughter. Those are the kind of like really dope, cool, honest, authentic conversations that we used to have. But it really does give you a sense of, so this is what they think of America, right? Which was very cool to see and a little scary.
So interesting. And I mean, I feel like it speaks to how a lot of our cultures in Africa are still quite conservative. Mm-hmm. And so just to think that, you'd be having that conversation in an environment where people are, obviously working and are maybe even a bit more progressive, like slightly more progressive than the average, like Ugandan. Yeah. It's interesting to think that those were their feelings about the Kim Kardashian situation.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Jasmine, you've had really great experiences on the continent. What would you say you've had to become accustomed to while living in Africa?
This is a good question. I would have to say it's a couple of things. So I'll answer this question with two. So first, I would say something that I had to get accustomed to living on the continent as a Black American from very humble beginnings, definitely like lower class family. I think what I had to get accustomed to was kind of the privilege that I had coming here. It would work with the reverse too. So especially like in Uganda where someone sees me as a foreigner, a Mzungu, right? If I was with a group of Ugandans in Uganda or even here in South Africa and someone hears my accent, like they might be nicer to me. And a lot of the time they think I'm rich. One person in South Africa asked me if I know Cardi B, and I'm like, no, I don't know her. And maybe it's because we're both ratchet, I don't know. But even when I was in Uganda, like I took the GMAT when I was there. So I'm like at the office studying quite late. And one night, one of my coworkers was there with me. He's doing like some finance work. And he just randomly, I don't even think we were listening to this artist, but he randomly stops what we're listening to. Well, we're in different corners, but he randomly stops what he's listening to. And then he just yells over like, Jasmine. And I'm like, yo, what's up? He's like, is Tupac really dead? Like, what? So kind of like being the spokesperson, right? But then the second thing that is a bit more jarring for me has been the question, no, where are you really from? And I mean, I get that question from so many different people of different African nationalities too. Like they always are like, no, where are you from? And I usually am like this, like, hey, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Congo. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from the US. No, like, where are you from? Well, no, my family's from New Jersey. No, where are you really from? And I mean, it's usually like 2 to 3 times that I get the question, even though I'm trying to nudge that, like, nah, I'm from America. That's it. That's all I know. I get it a lot. So it gets a little exhausting and it gets a little awkward and weird because I'm trying to over explain like how my family has been in the US since slavery. So I don't really know where I'm from. And so, yeah, it just gets weird. It gets awkward. And now I'm like the weird person at the club talking about slavery because this man won't let me just be like, I'm from New Jersey. So I feel like there's like lack of understanding or knowledge about like the Black American experience and maybe even African American history. Like I do know that, you know, African people are very aware of slavery, but I feel like it's just not something that is at the forefront in their minds whenever, you know, you talk to them about certain things, or at least whenever I meet them. And they're like, oh, nah, you must be from East Africa. And I'm like, maybe, bro, I don't know. So that one's kind of tough.
That's such a heavy question.
Yeah.
And so for you to be able to navigate that graciously, I think says a lot. Because I don't think the average person would be able to really handle that well.
I never said it was graceful all the time, but I'm working on it. You know, this is my like 4th year living on the continent, so.
Wow. And would you say you, like over time, you've gotten more comfortable pushing back and more comfortable, like, you know, articulating like, okay, this is who I am, this is where I'm from, like, or has it been like just as difficult throughout?
That's a good question. I think over time, I've just gotten more comfortable. In the beginning, when I'm like, you know, not aggressive, maybe I'm too assertive or too excited or anxious in the way that I'm like answering the question. And plus, again, I find that it's a lot of the time like in the club or at a bar, and it's like, bro, I don't want to talk about this right now. But I will say the last person that asked me that, but I just was like, you know, I find it really interesting that like you as a Nigerian from London would ask me that question like twice, you know? And that, it wasn't like super nice. This was someone from Bumble. However, I do feel like kind of like asking that question and like talking a little bit further, it did make him be like, oh yeah, like you're right. Or like, oh, I wasn't trying to offend you. I just, and, you know, just letting him know like, no, I'm not offended. It's just something that I'm like wondering if is top of mind for people. You know, you're like meeting people around the world, right? So if you ask me where I'm from 2 to 3 times and I keep saying the US, I'm probably there from generations back, you know?
I guess it's just interesting to think that you've had like so many of those interactions.
Yeah.
And I wonder if like, I wonder what people are thinking as they're like asking you those questions.
What are you thinking?
And what's like influencing that?
Yeah. So, you know,
like where that's coming from.
That's a good thought, because I feel like the more I talk to different people, like I have a really wonderful friend group, people from all over the continent. And which is nice because then I can just kind of like ask them the questions that I want to ask. I can voice my grievances with them and they're like, oh, relax, whatever. But one of the things that they say about the question is like, you know, this is a very, like you're living on the continent, right? We all look a certain way, right? Like we all have melanin, and, you know, it's really more of like, what nation are you from? You know, what kind of currency does your passport have? You know? Because I hear your accent and I know that's some kind of currency, but like, what does your passport look like? So sometimes that is what the underlying, I think, question is about. But then other times I find that just over my time living on the continent and interacting with so many different African people, I think it's like also a little bit of pride too, because it's like, where are you from? You from East Africa? You one of us, ain't you? You know, or you know, you look like you could be from wherever, someone might say. You know, like when I was in Zanzibar, someone told me I looked like I could be Tanzanian, right? So I also think it's like that, like pride and like who are your people? You could be my people, which I feel like I of course welcome that. Like that's like a very to me, I find that very endearing.
And I feel like it's a natural thing for people to want to kind of make sense of like, okay, who am I talking to? What category do you fit in? Like I hear the accent, like
what are you doing in this country? Like why are you with us? Like who are you? Yeah, definitely.
Man, but I definitely relate as far as like the people wanting to know, like, you know, if you're, I guess, a part of their tribe, essentially. Like, I've gotten that a lot, even when we were in Rwanda. Like, I got someone saying, oh my gosh, you look Rwandese.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, do I?
Thank you.
I was like, thank you. That's cool. I'm glad that I fit right in.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, I would hope that people aren't attempting to cause harm or cause trauma. It's like, you know, they're just trying to like figure out where you're from and how they can I guess act accordingly. But you know, this reminds me a lot of like the diaspora wars and this global like misunderstanding of each other, it seems like. And for those who aren't familiar, the diaspora wars can be loosely described as cross-cultural arguments among different ethnicities of African people where we essentially express discontent with each other for various reasons. And so recently there have been, I mean, for decades, there have been lots of examples of this, but more recent examples would be like, you know, when, let's say like a new film like Black is King comes out, and it's basically received differently across the diaspora. So African folks, continental folks receive it a certain way. You know, Black Americans obviously are going to receive it a certain way. And those are some of the most, I guess, visible examples of like people just really revealing how much we just don't know about each other. What we think of like the diaspora wars, like we think of them as like maybe these online like virtual arguments. But it's like they are actually real essentially because they come into play in like our day-to-day lives, our day-to-day interactions, and especially as you travel across the continent and you meet folks, you know, from all over, you're like, oh, okay, like there really is this misunderstanding of, you know, who I am as a Black person in this particular context.
I'm just trying to tread lightly on this topic because I want to do more good than harm. So that's why I'm looking a little fidgety over here. Don't worry about me.
No worries. So it's interesting to think, again, like the diaspora wars are very real. How would you say that's played out in your interactions while living in Africa?
I will say, number one, I just want to say that wars it's such a nasty word. It's such a big word. It's just, and I don't like that. And this is something I just recently thought about when thinking about this topic, right? I don't know if wars is the best way for us to put it. I don't know what the best word would be. But I would also say that I'm not sure that we even know that we're interacting with each other in such a harmful way. Which is the great thing about society, right? It's like you evolve over time. So things that were cool back in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, we're not doing those things anymore, right? But I will say, I have had a number of experiences that have given me Diaspora Wars vibes, not purposely, but that's kind of how I would categorize it. A little story time. I was at a bar with friends, and I'm going to do my best to provide all the details of this evening because I was talking to another friend, and they told me that, I think we as people, we try to curate a very specific story, and it's like, let's just, keep all details there and let people take from it what they will. So it's a Saturday in Johannesburg. I live in Johannesburg, for anyone who did not pick that up. I'm an expat. I've been here for about 3 years, so I've had some experiences. And maybe about a month ago, I'm at a bar. It's a gay bar. It's a Saturday night. It's in Braamfontein, and I'm with a friend who's with his guy friends. I'm kind of like sitting to myself. This random, very cute guy walks up to me, crop top, very cute, dressed for the evening. He walks up to me and just randomly is like, "Black people scare me." And I'm like, there's music playing, there's drinks. So I'm not really sure what he says, but I'm like, what? I'm trying to hear what he's saying. And he says, "Black people scare me." And like, I have a YouTube channel, but I'm not like by any means famous. So I'm like thinking that I'm this like random person that he just walked up to. Could he know that I'm a Black American? Because my first thought was like, does he mean Black Americans scare him? Because that would make sense, it's a South African person. Why would you say that to me, right? If you can't possibly think I'm South African, right? But then on the other hand, I was thinking, he could also be a person who is experiencing some self-hate for whatever reason at this moment in life. But for me, I kind of feel like either way, these are my people. Whether we talking about South Africans or we talking about Black Americans, he said Black people are my people. So now I feel like I need to go on defense. It was a whole scene. Nothing too crazy happened. Fast forward to when things are dying down, maybe 5 minutes later. And I'm like telling him like, you kind of wildin'. Like, what's good with you? Like, why would you say that to me? That's like so crazy to say. Do you know he said, "I don't even understand why you're so upset. Like, you really need to relax. Like, technically, I'm Blacker than you because I'm from here. So you don't even need to get that mad." I think I was just like super speechless at such a response, right? Because I think for me, what I've experienced a lot of the time, and maybe even other Black Americans, is like, African, it might be an African person who's telling me, and I know African is very broad, it's not a specific country, but this could be anyone from any country on the continent. The energy is very much like, you're not one of us. So some could take that as like, you're not an African, right? Some also could take that as like, what level of Blackness are we, right? And so, but of course no African person has ever said to me, "I'm Blacker than you because I'm from the continent," until this person a month ago. Even though in my mind, I feel like that would somewhat be what the energy felt like sometimes, right? So you have like that intense experience. And, some people might feel like it was a 10-minute experience, like some random drunk person at the club. I posted it on TikTok and someone asked me, well, they might be colored. Are they colored? So it's kind of like, if this was a South African person talking to me, it felt like a little battle, right? And if it's a colored South African person who thought they were talking to a South African that was Black, or talking to another Black person, also, that feels like a battle. Like, it feels like you're kind of ready for war a little bit, So
many layers.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I don't know if you explained it earlier, but like for those that don't know, colored in South Africa means mixed race,
Yes, it
right?
means like a person who is of multiracial ethnicity, like
Mm-hmm.
way back. Not necessarily like, oh, I have a white mom and a black dad, or it's like it goes back to back generations and in their family lineage.
What an interaction. I don't know that I've ever experienced something similar, especially like when you're out at like a club just
A
trying to have a good
function.
time. Like who's got the energy and the time to be having these super deep,
Yeah.
conversations about identity.
Yeah.
So that's a very weird situation, and I'm sorry you had to experience that. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, it just again is another reminder of how much we don't understand each other and how prevalent, especially like anti-blackness is globally.
Girl. Yes.
Because if you, if that person was, let's say mixed race, black, white, it's like maybe, like you said, there was that self-hatred,
Yep.
coming into play and saying like, okay, I'm maybe not happy with my black side. Or it could have been I don't know, a colorist thing. I don't know.
Yep.
Like there's so many layers and so many possibilities.
Yeah, I was gonna say when we're talking about diaspora wars, right? Like that example that I just gave is kind of extreme, right? It's like, all right, is somebody gonna walk up to you in the club and say that, right? But I can give a much shorter, different example that has nothing to do with me, right? So when I first moved to South Africa, I was in consulting. So I'm like working in one of the big three consulting offices. I won't get too specific. And I'm talking to one of the she's a young consultant. I don't think that she's colored, but she is South African. And I moved here in like September 2019. So all I could talk about was in December, I'm going to Ghana. This year is the year of return. I'm going to Ghana, 2019, year of return. And I mean, I was telling everybody, right? Do you know I was getting coffee with this I was getting coffee with this girl, honey. And I'm like, yeah, girl. She's asking me like, what are you doing for Christmas and New Year's? Because it's a huge festive season in South Africa as well, the entire month of December. So I'm like, I'll be gone for like the last 2 weeks of the month. I'm going to Ghana for year of return. I'm gonna be in Accra. I'm gonna do Afrochella. Da, da. She turned to me and said, "Oh, you going to real Africa?" I couldn't believe. I mean, I was in a chokehold in that moment. I couldn't. I said, "I'm sorry, what?" So, "Oh yeah, you going to real Africa?" I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And I feel like that is like, I don't know, maybe that is like lack of exposure or South Africa considering themselves, the West of Africa. But to me, that felt very like anti-Africa, anti-Black. We're South Africa, so we're different, Um, and again, someone might be like, nah, that's not diaspora wars. To me, I feel like it's like these small little things that kind of feed into the contentment that we have for each other across the diaspora. So for me, it's like those kinds of interactions. Like you dead ass just said Ghana is real Africa. Okay, SA, so what are you?
And I'm just thinking she obviously maybe lives in a bubble,
Maybe.
Maybe in a pretty privileged bubble. And you could probably speak more to this, but from my understanding, South Africa is, very segregated, like class-wise, like there's a huge divide as far as like, poor versus
Absolutely.
rich, or, privileged versus like underprivileged. And so I would imagine maybe she doesn't interact with the everyday South African. And so to her, South Africa is, the super developed, not so African place.
I don't know. I feel like that's a lot of credit. Not saying that no one in South Africa can come from that background, but I'm just saying like This person is probably our age, quite educated. She's at this like top consulting firm, right? So I know that she's smart. I know that she's capable. I know that like you have to have some level of awareness of what's going on around you at a minimum. Especially if we're thinking about South Africa, gender-based violence. We're thinking about like the car snatch theft. That you have to like go through a briefing on when you first arrive in the country. It's like, I know you've seen a township in South Africa before. Like, I know you have, like, there's no way you can tell me that you have no interaction or understanding or idea of the conditions of the people who live around you. A majority of the people in this country.
Yeah.
That are Black with huge inequity.
That's a bit disturbing.
Yeah.
Considering how privileged that woman is and the types of decisions that she would be making on behalf of, different stakeholders. Like, knowing that she has that lens is a bit scary. And I think that's another example of anti-Blackness because, you're thinking of, like, okay, let's say Ghana is this super African, the more real Africa, like, and?
Right, what does that mean? Like,
yeah, like, what does that even mean? Like, goodness. Yeah, and I guess it's just disappointing to hear that in 2022, we can, I don't know what year that happened, actually, but, that in these modern times where people have plenty of access to information, it's disappointing to hear that we continue to hold just those ideas of African nations, Black people across the globe. It's definitely disheartening to hear. And, I appreciate you like sharing your experiences. My experiences on the continent have obviously been very different, like given my identities. I'm African. I was born in Africa. Yeah. And so, but it's interesting to think, like, even though I am African, when I travel to the continent, when I travel back home especially, I feel like I experience a few things that are similar to kind of what you shared earlier, as far as feeling like I get treated differently. Yeah. Because of my now, I guess, Zambian-American identity, like adding that American to it, I think has shaped a lot of like how people just perceive me, the privilege that I do have, but then the misunderstanding of how much privilege I have, like people thinking I have more money or more access than I actually do. And so it's very interesting to navigate that. And a lot of times it honestly does make me feel uncomfortable just because I'm like, when I go back home, I just want to blend in and I just want to be a Zambian visiting my home country. But people are very quick to remind me that, girl, like, you are very different from us. And that's, something that I've had to get accustomed to over time, and something that I'm trying to, I guess, own a bit more. And I guess I'm trying to spin it in like a positive light, like to say like, okay, let's say I do have, which I do, let's say I do have this privilege, what can I do with it? Like, what sort of access do I have that can maybe be helpful to society? So I've over time started to like frame it that way versus like getting super offended that people are just pointing out how like not Zambian I am. But as far as like the diaspora wars go, I would say I've had mostly positive interactions with people from across the diaspora, whether they're, Black American or they're like, first generation American.
Very happy to hear that.
And like growing up, I think it was, early on, like let's say middle school, like people just did not understand. People were like, I remember this one girl asking me like, oh, are you Black? When I said like, I'm Zambian. I remember her asking me, are you Black? And I was like, well, yeah.
I think so.
I'm I'm very black. I'm from the land of black people.
Right.
Um, so it was interesting, I think, in that moment, because I think the girl that asked me that question also maybe didn't have an understanding
Yep.
of like what blackness looks like outside of America, because she was an African American asking me.
Yeah.
So maybe she hadn't had experiences with like foreign blacks, like non descendants of like, American like chattel slavery. Like I think her exposure to African people was very limited.
Yeah.
And so in that moment she asked me that question, I think also just trying to gain an understanding of like,
Yeah.
okay, like you look like me, but then you're not from here. Like, what does that actually mean? And again, that was middle school, like maybe 7th, 8th grade. So, we were just getting to the point where we're like really like learning about history and stuff. So I'm sure at that point there wasn't an understanding that like there are there are a lot of new black folks, I guess, migrating to the US. Like there's like a whole new wave of new immigrants, from, black countries like coming to the US. So that's like one example that I can think of where there was just like a complete just disconnect. So over time though, as we've gotten older, I've gotten mostly positive experiences, and especially as I've gotten more comfortable like just owning who I am and saying, yes, I'm a Zambian, this is my culture. The more boldly I shared it, the more people were just like, oh, tell me more. And the more curious they became versus like, I guess, ignorant.
That's a really good point. Like you leading with Zambian culture versus like someone walking up to you and being like, oh, what is this? Because I will say, I mean, Black Americans, we have a long way to go as well as far as like understanding African culture, not contributing to diaspora wars as well. But I am happy to hear that. And again, it's kind of like what I was saying earlier about like just society evolving. I feel like our generation, we're like much more interested in like what each other's got going on.
Yeah, it's like a nice shift, I would say, because I think just hearing a lot of people's stories growing up, it's like, a lot of people had really traumatic experiences, interacting with folks from across the diaspora, and people not understanding where they're from, people, mocking and making fun of the places that they're from. So it's like, I don't know that that's completely over. It probably isn't. But it's nice to see this like healthy shift towards people at least being more curious about like understanding each other.
That's kind of what I was referring to. Like I experienced that personally, like not personally, but going to high school with African students and seeing like people pick on them just because they're African. That was something that was like a big deal and like very traumatic for a lot of African students and people who are probably from the area where I'm from as well. So for me, I feel like today what I do, again, like over time you learn, right? So for me, I'm like much more vocal about what anyone has to say about any African country or any African, especially my family. Like my grandma will be like, some Africa. I'm like, nah, grandma, you need to say Ghana. You're not talking about, and this is grandma. This grandma I'm talking to, but this woman is nearly 80 years old. So, like I am trying to like do my best to be a person who's like also sharing the knowledge, because there is still a lot of ignorance, surprisingly, in 2022,
Absolutely. And again, I keep bringing it up, but I think it all comes from like anti-Blackness. And I find myself having similar conversations with, family or just people, in different like African communities here in the US. Like you still do hear negative things about like, let's say African Americans. And I always interrogate that, because I'm like, why are you talking about a fellow Black person this way?
Yeah.
Like, why do you sound like a white person?
Yeah.
You know,
That'll
why are
really
you
get
saying
them.
the same things?
That'll really get them. You sound like a white person. It's like, whoa, what?
You know, like, why do you sound like a white person,
Mm-hmm.
you know, talking about African Americans? Like, it's like there's a disconnect there, and
Yeah.
there's a gap, and there's like, essentially, that shouldn't be happening. Like, we should be more understanding of each other, and we
Yeah.
should be able to give each other, you know, grace, and like, we should seek to like understand each other more.
Yeah.
Because if you have the same talking points and the same stereotypes as like white people do about Black people, like,
Yeah.
do you not know what you look like navigating through America? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you look Black. The first thing
Yeah.
that people see is a Black person. They don't
Yep.
know that you're African or like foreign or whatever. So it's like those same ideas you have. It's like you're just pointing at yourself,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
Globally, there just continues to be these misconceptions and misunderstandings of each other's cultures. How would you say we can foster like a better understanding of each other as folks across the diaspora?
That's a massive question. It's a massive question, but I'll take a stab at it. Because it is something that I think about often, just as a person who's had to move through like so many different diasporic spaces. And I'm trying to get good at it, you know. I was exposed to this writer and journalist named Esther Arma. I heard her speak one time about radical grace. Like, she said, you know, what we need, we as in like different parts of the diaspora, right? Like, we really need to work on extending this like extreme level of grace to one another, because we are both, not even both, but like all parts of the diaspora are working through their own experiences with imperialism or colonization. And you know, it's not just one group who has a lot of work to do. You know, like, we all have our own work to do. We're all kind of like scarred in our own way. And so this like first step would really be radical grace. And I feel like, you know, we all could extend more grace. Black Americans can extend more grace. Different people from different parts of the diaspora on the continent can extend more grace, from the diaspora from South America, the Caribbean, beyond. Like, I think radical grace is like a good first step to kind of foster more understanding, because that way, you know, like, for instance, for me, I can like, you know, not get so offended by someone asking me 3 times, no, where are you really from? And I can kind of take that as an opportunity to kind of just express, you know, or share my story. Like, well, you know, this is my story as a Black person of the diaspora. I know yours is different. This is what mine looks like. It feels simple.
Wouldn't that be beautiful?
It feels simple. It sounds good, right? But day to day, I don't know, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking of like, you know, when things are just kind of going crazy on Twitter.
Yeah.
People are like,
Radical
hey,
grace.
you know, that hasn't been my experience. What?
I don't know if radical grace is a tool for social media. I wouldn't say that. I'm hoping, I'm meaning more, not in that context.
That's fair. I think, like you said, it's a great first step. And we need to be able to really, really, extend each other that grace, and be able to really like see each other, you know, because if you see another Black person, it shouldn't be like, oh, like beef, you know, like, oh, you look different, or like, where are you from? Like, you know, like, I feel
what set you rep? Like, whoa, we're all together.
You know,
we're all together.
Yeah, I really wish we would all just say like, oh wow, like, you have a beautiful name. Like,
Yeah.
where is that from?
Yeah.
Where are your people from? In like a way that's like really trying to seek understanding,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like coming from a place of curiosity and
Yeah.
not from a place of like, all right, I need to know so I can start, assuming all these things about you and where you
Yeah.
might be from. Like,
Yeah.
so there's definitely room for across the diaspora. There's definitely room for us to be
Yeah.
just more grateful, and understanding of each other. And, that's a great first step. How do you think we can challenge ourselves even more?
I would say just kind of using like the avenues that we're already engaging in. Like I feel like we get a lot of flack across the diaspora of like, y'all need to come together. We need to come together, and we need to learn more about each other. But I feel like one way that is already happening is through music. I'm talking from hip hop to Amapiano to Afro beats. Like, I don't know. I feel like Last is really bringing the diaspora together. You got Burna Boy with this
Yes.
Tony Braxton sample. It's like, to me, that was a moment for the diaspora. That was like, okay, you know what? It might be little, the steps might be small, but we get in there. We get in there.
Mm-hmm.
We're understanding each other. I feel like music is a great place to start because that's bringing these different cultures together, right? That's where you can learn more. And I also feel like that's the case with food and travel. I feel like it's coming slowly but surely. But, continuing to do those things, engage in the arts, engage in travel.
And today, in 2022, it's so easy to tap into each other's cultures in that
Yeah.
way. Music, movies,
Yeah.
go on Netflix and watch,
Yes.
African content,
Yep.
watch Black content from
Yep.
the US. Like, there's just so many ways we can really, really just engage with each other's cultures in an authentic way, and just start to learn even more about each other. So I'm so happy that that's like just more accessible,
Yeah.
in 2022. And another thing I always think about, is just for us to have like a greater understanding of just our histories, and
Yeah.
how similar a lot of our histories are, and how for decades now, maybe even centuries, we've been working towards fostering greater understanding, like across the African diaspora. Like these conversations that we're having, like this conversation we're having,
Yeah.
like this is this is not the first time,
Yeah.
people have gathered from across the diaspora to discuss, how we can collaborate more, how we can understand each other more. And I think it's really important for us to know like history, because
Yeah.
if you look back, for instance, like as a lot of like African nations were beginning to like gain independence, Ghana is an example, I'm thinking of. Like it happened in 1960. Ghana was like the first sub-Saharan African country, I believe, to gain independence. And in 1960, if you think about it, like the Civil Rights Act in the United States hadn't even passed yet.
Yep.
So it's like, African nations were, cutting off those colonial ties. But then, the work was still happening towards like achieving like, equity in the United States.
Yep.
And there were plenty of examples of leaders of different movements across the diaspora, like getting together to share ideas, to inspire each other. And even like at Ghana's independence, it was, attended by leaders across the globe, and Black leaders,
Yeah.
especially Martin Luther King, John Lewis, I believe. Yes, he was also there. So it's like, it's so interesting to think that, that was the early 60s, and these, prominent like civil rights leaders were like going to Ghana to celebrate with Africans, to say like, wow, like liberation,
Yeah.
this is super inspiring. We are hoping for the same. where we're from, essentially. And so I think it's like super eye-opening to just think of those types of examples.
Yeah.
Because then we know, like, oh, like we don't have to be like at war.
Yeah.
We don't have to misunderstand each other. Like, we can actually like inspire each other to do like and achieve that much more.
Yeah. That's such a great point. I feel like I am always surprised or taken aback when I'm watching maybe some like historical movie or a documentary, and there's like some Black American with a sign that's like end apartheid in South Africa, and I'm like, oh, they really been on it. And it just makes me think about like Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman or person to like put in a bid for presidency back in the 70s. Like, there is documentation of her efforts to, put economic pressure on South Africa's apartheid government because of the conditions in this country. So, for me, it's just like, all right, well, you're right. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Our ancestors and people who came before us, this is something that they've been trying to like, kind of demonstrate to us that like you're a part of something greater. And, use your voice for them as well, think beyond, the diaspora of what you see and where you are. Like, there's so much more to us.
In so many ways, like we're facing like similar issues, like social issues. We're fighting very similar battles. We're trying to achieve the same things. We're trying to break generational curses and build wealth, and like a lot of us are just now having the opportunity to do so. And it's like really, really just an interesting time. And like if someone in Africa is experiencing that, and then another person in America is experiencing the same thing, it's like we have more in common than I think we think.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
It's really important for us to know like we're all kind of trying to work towards the same thing, and we can actually foster like just more unity, more progress, and we can like exchange ideas and help each other just advance in so many ways. So super important. And I always end with what excites you about Africa's future?
I love this question. I think what excites me the most about Africa's future is Black people across the world actually coming to explore the continent. So the cultural exchange that's happening between like Black people from the West and Black people on the continent and other parts of the world through events like Afrochella or Year of Return or Expat Life. I find it so exciting that there are so many Black people who are actually like paying attention to the continent, and they want to spend their money here and they want to come and vacation here, because if for whatever reason maybe they know nothing about it and they have the most ignorant ideas of it, at least to me, it's like, nah, that's cultural exchange. Someone is coming here, they're gonna learn what it's really like. More of us doing that, more younger people, our generation, our kids. I feel like by the time the next generation comes, I think it'll be a much more of a global, like the diaspora will be much more connected with the way that things seem. I mean, that's my guess. I know that might be a little hopeful, wishful thinking, but I'm banking on it. I'm banking on it.
Absolutely. I mean, likewise, I'm just as excited to see more people traveling to the continent, more people just be curious about it. And so, yeah, it's definitely like a great time to be in at this moment.
Yeah.
Obviously we just represent two
people. Exactly.
Yeah. So you share a lot of, your experiences and on the continent on your YouTube channel.
Yes.
Could you share a bit more about it and how people can like find it?
Happily. So my YouTube channel is Jazzy Jetsets, JAZZYJETSETS, and I basically use this as a platform to talk about my experience as an expat living in South Africa, what it's like being Black American on the continent, and also really trying to shed light on what it's like and how exciting or interesting it is to travel throughout the continent. So traveling to different African cities, showing like the really cool and fun side, the luxury side, maybe the not so luxury side. So yes, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and check it out if you are interested in learning more about what it's like living on the continent